Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 179, The Insidious Bias That Wears Introverts Down. I have been asked so many times over the last 5 years what I mean by the extraversion bias. In fact, I've talked about the bias in episodes 52 and 125, albeit from different perspectives, so you might want to listen to those episodes too. I'm sad in a way that awareness is not greater by now, and I'm happy to keep explaining. Why? Because I believe information is the prelude to transformation. And this bias truly is insidious in that it is harmful in an almost imperceptible manner. As youngsters, we may not know it's there, and by the time we're old enough or educated enough to recognise it, chances are it's done a lot of damage to our well-being and sense of self-worth. And FYI, insidious comes from a Latin word for ambush, insidii, which is rather fitting, don't you think? We and our gentle, calm, reflective nature get ambushed by the norms of society. Well, this woman is not succumbing to the ambush, and in battle terms, I'm heading straight through the enemy lines and exposing those who think it's an acceptable strategy to perpetuate. As you can tell, I'm in a rallying the troops mood at the moment, so who's with me? You see, in a world that glorifies the outgoing, sociable and gregarious, we introverts typically find ourselves navigating education systems and business cultures that are not inclusive. This bias, known as the extraversion bias, permeates pretty much all aspects of life, from families, early years education, through traditional and later years education, workplaces, social gatherings, and even personal relationships. The extraversion bias not only marginalises introverts, which impacts our career opportunities, but it also, understandably, takes a toll on our well-being, self-esteem, and overall happiness. In this episode, then, I'm delving into the complexities of the extraversion bias, its implications, and the steps we can take to address and overcome this pervasive extraversion bias. I trust I don't need to go into too much detail about the difference between extroverts and introverts, so I'll simply share again Simon Sinek's explanation. An introvert wakes up with a pocket full of coins and over the day loses those coins. They are the price that introverts pay for noisy office environments, unfulfilling interactions, and being amidst the hurly-burly of people. Extroverts, on the other hand, wake up penniless and gather their coins through any type of interaction, banter, and by generally being with people. What makes one rich, emotionally and mentally, bankrupts the other. The extraversion bias, then, is any practice or process that shows favour to those who extrovert, to the ones who speak more than they listen, to the ones who boldly push themselves forward and self-promote, to those who have seemingly endless energy for socialising and networking, to those who are fiercely competitive, to those big characters who often assume leadership. Our society favour those who make us laugh with their wacky antics on TikTok and their staged reels. Society favours those who are the life and soul of the party. Society favours those who can get on stage and deliver a spontaneous presentation. That is the extraversion bias. I wasn't aware of this bias growing up, nor in my early years of employment. They seemed like very different times back then. We respected our elders and those who were more senior to us in organisations. And then in the 1980s, we saw the rise of what I call the Red Silk Lining Brigade, the brash investment bankers. For me, that's when the extraversion bias began to emerge. And that's just my working hypothesis. What is true is that we've become inured to associating leadership with more extroverted traits. Media portrayal and society reinforcement further perpetuate this bias, creating an environment that favours extraversion and downplays the strengths of introverts. As a result, introverts are often misunderstood and subjected to various myths and stereotypes. We are mistakenly labelled as shy, socially inept, or lacking in assertiveness. These misconceptions disregard the unique strengths that we possess, such as our ability to think deeply, to listen attentively, and to exhibit a calm and reflective demeanour. I could go on to talk about the bias in the education system, but for this episode I want to focus on the workplace. And a typical workplace could be called an extrovert's paradise. It's long been observed that employers often prioritise extroverted qualities in the hiring process, such as strong networking skills, a charismatic presence, and the ability to dominate a conversation. This inevitably means that we introverted candidates are likely to be overlooked in spite of our valuable contributions and unique strengths. I've told you before of my anger at candidates being coached to be more extroverted for their interviews. How about instead we coach the recruiters and interview panel to operate unbiased selection? The trend to more open office spaces began in the 1960s, and more recently we've had this desire for constant collaboration, which can be challenging for introverts. And as our brains are already overstimulated, this means we get overwhelmed, which hinders our ability to concentrate, to focus, and to get into flow with our work. The result? Below par performance, which we then get criticised for. Additionally, the emphasis on group work and brainstorming sessions may overlook introverts' preference for individual reflection and thoughtful contribution. Networking and socialising are often seen as essential for career advancement, when in reality they may have little impact on our day-to-day work. Even though I now have my strategic approaches to these activities, I still get drained by them, which again tips me into a state of overwhelm. For some it does more than that though. It creates feelings of anxiety and increases their stress. Either way, they end up being exclusionary activities. The pressure to constantly engage in social interactions not only hinders authentic growth, but also leads to feelings of not enoughness. And frankly, that is unacceptable. And on a side note, I wonder how those who socialise all day at work get their work done. Meetings, especially poorly chaired or spontaneous meetings, tend to favour the extrovert communication style, with their demand for quick decision-making, on-the-spot interactions and a dominant presence. This inevitably hinders introverts from fully expressing their ideas and perspectives. We know we need time to process information before contributing, which can be challenging in those fast-paced discussions. Because we keep our heads down and do our work often without drama, we may face challenges in receiving recognition for our contributions. It's not unknown for others to think it's okay to take credit for our work, as we are less likely to make a fuss. When it comes to performance evaluation and recognition, this bias leaves many of my clients feeling overlooked and undervalued. All in all, this bias sucks, doesn't it? And whilst I could talk more about the bias in social gatherings and personal relationships, I want to move on to talk about the psychological impact the bias has, and most importantly, what we can do about it. And the reason that I'm so keen to explore this bias with DEI leaders is because of the psychological impact it has on us. And remember, we're about 50% of any population, so we're not an insignificant minority. Let's start with emotional exhaustion and overstimulation. Constant exposure to extrovert-centric environments can rapidly lead from overwhelm to introvert hangover to introvert burnout. This level of emotional and mental exhaustion takes time to recover from. Our requirement for solitude and downtime to recharge is not a nice to have or a want. It's an essential need that is often overlooked or mocked. Where's the psychological safety in that? Then there are the feelings of isolation. Now this is an odd one because introverts typically like and need time to ourselves, and we even enjoy our own company. But when we're excluded and isolated, even though we've done nothing more than be ourselves, this can have a damaging impact. And just so you know, many of us have experienced years or even decades of exclusion. It's time for inclusivity and valuing our differences. Those years and decades of being excluded and othered can lead to lowered self-esteem and self-worth. Repeated exposure to the extraversion bias has eroded many an introvert's sense of self-esteem and self-worth. How is it okay for that to be acceptable? So if it's not acceptable, and it really isn't, what can we do to overcome the extraversion bias? First and foremost, raise awareness and promote understanding. Education and awareness about the bias and its impact is essential to challenge this ongoing extraversion bias. By promoting a better understanding of introverted traits and their value, we can combat misconceptions and stereotypes. Next, let's think about redefining success and leadership. Let's promote more leaders who represent a wider spectrum of skills, talents, and personality types. The world needs leaders who value difference, listen empathically, and demonstrate inclusive leadership. We're in dire need of thoughtful decision-making, situational humility, and longer-term strategic thinking. This means we're more likely to create inclusive environments. If we're to shift this bias that favours extroverted behaviours, we'll need to create environments that also accommodate and value the needs of introverts. This includes providing quiet spaces for focused work, flexible communication options, and promoting diverse collaboration methods that cater to different personality types. And while I'm on it, let's stop the ridiculous desire for things to go back to the way they were pre-pandemic. Those times are gone, and it's up to us to create better ways of doing things. I know that means change, but change is the one thing guaranteed in life after all. We also need to encourage introverts to embrace their strengths, whether that's ourselves, our team members, our children, our colleagues. It's high time introverts were encouraged to celebrate the unique strengths they possess. The knock-on effect of that would be an uplift in self-confidence for the 50% of us who identify as an introvert, which leads to improved self-worth. Now, I recognise that this is going to take some doing as we've been downtrodden for a long time. Empowering introverts to advocate for their needs and assert their value is crucial in creating a more inclusive society. So in conclusion, the extraversion bias poses a significant challenge for we introverts, impacting our personal and professional lives in profound ways. And it also exposes significant weaknesses in the practices and processes of many organisations. By recognising and addressing this bias, we can all foster a more inclusive and diverse environment that values introverted individuals for their unique qualities and contributions. It is essential to challenge the stereotypes and myths surrounding introversion. to educate others about our strengths and abilities, and to create spaces that cater to different personality types. By embracing introversion, we can harness the full potential of both introverts and extroverts, which fosters a more harmonious and productive society. It's time to create a world that values and appreciates the rich tapestry of human personality, so we dismantle the insidious bias that wears introverts down. Join me as I head towards the perpetrators of this bias, and let's face them together. If you need resources to share in a team meeting or to pin on a notice board, I have plenty, so just email me and we'll beat this ambush together. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.